Hi everyone. I think I'm a little disappointed. I was expecting many more people, and we're going to have I guess you could say a very special meeting today, because you're all going to be treated to seeing something that doesn't really officially exist. Before we start, Jen, how do I start the tape recorder? Just press
New technology, people.
No operating instructions at the push.
You push.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to start out by saying that over the years, there have been the Apple II, the II Plus, the IIe, the IIc, and the IIGS. However, those are only the computers that we have been able to purchase. Throughout the years, Apple has produced many different prototypes. What we have here isn't the only one. Back in 1981, around the time that the Apple II Plus was the big seller, Apple built a prototype called the Super 2 that eventually evolved into the IIe. However, when you look at it, you see it's quite different. And when you look at the motherboard, you wonder, what kind of plans do they really have for this? For all Apple IIs, usually the power supply sits here. Here's a memory expansion port. Might this have been a portable? We don't know. How could, we don't know. To leave it at that. Obviously, this machine was never released, and this machine was never released. This here is, as you all know, what is called Codenamed Mark Twain computer. It's I guess you could say, the last Apple IIGS ever built. Unfortunately, it was never released. And what I want to do is, in a sense, take you through my personal odyssey of this machine. After I've done talking, I have a feeling some of you are going to want to see the innards. And so for those who might be more technically inclined, we're going to take it apart so you can see everything in there. Okay, back, my involvement with this machine. As people who subscribe to my newsletter know, back in, and actually members of the group know, it has a lot to do with GravenStein. Back in 1991, I was writing for Insider Magazine, rest in peace, and around January that year, my editor called me and he said, "Hey Joe, why don't we do an article on where to go for support? How do people get help?" And I've been writing articles about telecommunications, using online networks, and it seemed that, that only a small percentage of computer users, not just Apple II owners, but just a small percentage of computer users, maybe 15, 20, no more than 25% own modems. For those of you who do, you can get almost instant help. The other area that it was decided that I'd talk about and cover would be Apple II user groups. And so I thought, well, how can I write about user groups if I don't go visit a user group? So I drove up to GravenStein, and I have to tell you, I was really impressed with what I saw. That was back in, I guess you could say, the glory days when there were 60, 70 people at a meeting, or then the then president was selling hard drives for unbelievable pricing for that period of time. I guess, only $500 for a 40 meg hard drive. Actually, I don't remember the pricing, but it was much higher than it is now. I was very impressed. I joined the club that day, ended up writing my article and featuring GravenStein in it. In case anyone remembers, it was a sidebar talking about the club and how it met the needs of people to get help. And that was the same year that the yearly Apple User Group connection sponsored a show or a convention here in Berkeley. I contacted the guy who was putting it on and said, "So what do you have for the Apple II?" And he said, "Nothing." And I said, "Well, is that Apple II user groups are half of the user groups?" And he said, "If you want to set it up, go ahead, be my guest." So I contacted a guy who had been, in a sense, I guess you could say he was a programmer who rose up through the ranks and got hired by Apple, Tim Swihart. Longtime members remember that in, I guess it was early 1992, we had a sneak peek of System 6, and he was the one that led the Apple contingent. Well, he was a longtime Apple II supporter, programmer, and since he was working for Apple, I contacted him and said, "Tim, why don't you come up and give a talk?" And that was right around the time that HyperCard had been released, System 5.04, and we just left it really loose. You know, I thought he was going to come up, a couple of programmers were going to come up and talk about recent Apple II products. I was wrong. The day of the convention, all of the bigwigs in the then Apple II division, which, to tell you the truth, I can't remember what it was called because they kept changing the name. And there were people like Jane Lee, John Santoro, Rob Barnes, people that I know he's met at Kansas Fest. I've met him at Kansas Fest. They didn't want to talk about System 5.04. They didn't want to talk about HyperCard. They wanted to talk about this. Remember, at the time, Apple had a policy where they refused to talk about unreleased products. They had a standard line. You know, you call them up or, you know, and ask them a question, and the standard line was, "We're not allowed to discuss products that may or may not be released." So it was kind of a shock that they were wanting to talk about this computer that was imminently going to be released. This computer, to put things into perspective, in the early 1990s, Apple realized that, well, maybe they didn't realize, but they were, quote unquote, losing market share. Their computers were more expensive. The year before, late 1990, they released the first of what they called their low-cost Macintoshes. They came in at $999, so they could say under $1,000. And these were basically complete systems. And the fact that they had a disk drive built in, they had a hard drive built in, they had a monitor. It was basically, you could buy it, take it home, plug it in, and it was ready to use. The Apple II division obviously had, you know, sort of fallen out of favor by this point in the Apple II hierarchy, but it was still active. They still had, you know, a number of engineers working for them, and so this machine was being developed. Now, no one at Apple is talking about it. One person that I contacted simply said, "It doesn't exist." And I wanted to say, "But I have one, of course it exists." And so no one at Apple's really talking about it. I cannot say anything definitive from Apple's point of view, except what I was told that day in mid-1991 at the user group convention. This machine was designed in some ways to be the low-cost GS, and the fact that you were going to be able to purchase it, take it home, plug it in, and it was going to start up, and it was going to have, you know, it has a hard drive built in, it has a 3.5-inch disc built in, and it came with, or it would have come with system software so it would run, and it was going to come with two products that were Apple's. HyperCard GS and AppleWorks GS. When you think of, you know, I mean, we all have our love-hate relationship with AppleWorks GS, but considering It's 6 programs in one, and a hypermedia program. What else do you need? You know, that's, she's heckling me, I knew it. Bye. So really, what else did you need? Well, considering there are 10,000 commercial programs for the Apple II, I mean, there's a lot else you could have. But when you think about schools, well, we needed a school, or we did, and we saw that the machines were, shall we say, underutilized. The real power of the GS was never really used, at least at Grant Street School, and I imagine most schools. So this machine, the intention was to sell it to educators. At the time, they had promotional material and pointed out what was called the educational bundle, which was in essence a ROM 3 computer that had 1 megabyte of RAM, or a little more than 1 megabyte. It had an external 40 megabyte hard drive. It came with, obviously a SCSI card connected to the computer. It came with system software. It came with HyperCard GS and AppleWorks GS. It was stressed to us at that time, this Mark Twain computer was not new technology. It was stressed to us that in essence, it was a dressed up ROM 3 with everything included, that it was the educational bundle. What's remarkable about the machine is not so much in essence, what the user would see. Because, take a typical teacher who had a ROM, this stripped down ROM 3 with the 1 megabyte of RAM and a 40 megabyte hard drive, which I guess at that time was not considered massive, but it was, it was certainly adequate. It was a great machine. This machine was meant to replace it. That day, they went around the room and asked us, well, do you have a transport? Yes. Do you have a 100 megabyte hard drive or bigger? Yes. Do you have 4 megs of RAM or more than this? And I can still remember Jane Lay saying, you people don't get it. You would not want to purchase this machine. You're the power users. You're the user group presidents. You have, souped up GSs. This is not a souped up GS. It is simply a box that has everything you need in one. And they went around and asked us, so what do you think something like this would be retailed for? And it was in a way, it was strange. It was like a guessing game. And in essence, I believed at the time what they were trying to do was gauge the reaction by saying, how much would you pay for this machine? And when someone said, well, $9.99 seems to be, that's what you're selling the low-cost Mac. It was as if, bingo, that's the magic number. Well, I've always understood that at Apple, the development process, the very last thing that happens is setting the price. And some of the machines, like if you've been, reading magazines about Apple products, you see pictures, like, if you read Macworld, you'll see a picture of a motherboard of a machine that'll come out, 6 months from now. And they'll tell you everything, how fast it is, what its capabilities are. They'll tell you everything except the price, because that's not set. With the computer industry, with prices dropping, you can't set a price, months in advance. The fact that that the price was the primary concern on their mind leads me to believe that things were set. They told us that they were ready to turn over the assembly line, and they were ready to throw the switch to start manufacturing these. At the time, I was working at Insider, so obviously I had, they had an 800 number I could call up and get any information I wanted. So a couple of weeks later, I found out that this same group had flown out to Peterborough, New Hampshire to show the staff of Insider the computer, which is something that they didn't show to us. They showed us pictures, they talked about it. But they had it, the Insider, they took pictures, they got the tour. They also had to sign non-disclosure agreements, which, I guess they broke by talking to me, but considering I was on staff, it didn't matter. They had, of course, planned to, as they'd done, when GS came out, they had, a picture of it on the front cover. They, of course, had planned to have lots of hoopla surrounding the release of this GS. Coincidentally, around this time, Steve Disbrow published GS Plus magazine. He got a letter from Apple saying, "We want you to change the name of your publication." He went so far as to put I can't call it a survey, but asking readers, "Well, we've been asked to change our name. What should it be changed to?" Well, I asked Steve years later, I said, "Steve, tell me what month that was." Mid-1991. So, possibly, this machine, as you notice, it doesn't have a name on the front. It's possible that this would have been called the GS Plus. Of course, we don't know. After Insider's non-disclosure agreement ran out, they had to sign a thing saying, "We'll keep quiet for," I think it was 90 days. My then cohort, Paul Stack, posted a message on America Online. He said something like, "I've seen the Mark Twain computer. I have seen the ROM4. I can now talk about it." He described it in detail. In essence, a built-in hard drive, 40 meg hard drive, a built-in 3.5-inch disk drive, 2 megabytes of RAM on the motherboard, a built-in high-speed SCSI card, a built-in SuperDrive controller card, built-in stereo output, built-in sound digitizing hardware, and he ended his message saying, "And they canceled it." Well, somehow at that time, I kind of remember there was a bit of a furor among the Apple II community, and somehow this thing that no one had ever seen a picture of it, took on a whole new, I don't know how to describe it, but it was like, in a way, I think a lot of Apple II users felt, well, this is the final kick in the rear from Apple. We've been teased with, John Scully saying we're going to support the Apple II well into the 1990s. Apple was still producing products for it. I mean, we were still, a good year away from System, well, I'm not sure, I don't remember exactly what month System 6 was released. I think it was January 92. And then, of course, 2 years later, we had System 6.01. At the time, for people who were Apple watchers, we were being dangled carrots in front of our face by Apple. We were being told that we'll support you, Apple II forever. Yet the reality is we're very different. And, in the early 1990s, I think it became clear to everyone that the Apple II was eventually going to become an orphan. And was it 94? Lunatic and I went to the meeting at Apple, the infamous meeting, Apple, Operation Apple Store, where, what had happened is a local user group president, Ernie Moore, that some of you may know, arranged this meeting. I think it took a year. There was this delay, that delay. It was delayed at the last minute. I was ready to leave my house, and I got a call from Ernie saying, "Whoops, it's put off till tomorrow." And he called a minute later. I would have driven down an Apple. And we didn't really know what to expect. We were having a to say, so tell us, what are you folks doing? You know, what are you going to do for us? And about halfway through the meeting, they just kind of let drop, oh, by the way, we're going to discontinue the Apple IIGS next month. If I remember correctly, it was strange. People didn't get crazy. They didn't get upset. I know when I left there, I felt relief. I know that's strange because, you know, I've been making my money with the Apple II for almost a decade. I like to think that I'm one of the biggest proponents. It had literally driven me crazy trying to figure out, what is Apple doing? You know, what are their plans for the Apple II? Are they going to support it or aren't they? So when they announced the discontinuation, as far as I was concerned, I was relieved. Let's jump ahead 5 years. And last October, Peggy Johnson, who's our secretary, she got a phone call from a woman. And, you know, as a user group, we have our number listed with Apple, and a number of us get phone calls. Hi, I got your name or your number from Apple's 800 user group locator number. Actually, these days, if anyone calls up Apple Computer, they're 1-800-SOS-APPLE, APPL. I'm having a problem with my computer. Well, what computer do you have? As soon as you say Apple II, what's your zip code? And they then look up the name and phone number of your nearest user group and tell you contact so-and-so. And they don't always tell you that it's a user group. So I know I get calls all the time. They think I'm, you know, an office from Apple or a dealer. And so Peggy got a phone call from someone, help, I'm having problems with my computer. And I guess she started describing the computer. Peggy got a little confused because she mentioned, well, there's something about the built-in disk drive. Well, the only built-in disk drive on an Apple II has been on the IIc. And she was saying, no, it's a 2GS. Well, as often happens, it was, well, why don't you bring your computer to the next meeting? And, you know, quite often what we found is that people have problems. One of us can fix it. And Ray McAnally was still actively involved, and Ray's our guy, Mr. Fix It, he can fix anything. And so, as it turned out, Ray was there that day. You know, he really hadn't been active in the club, but he was there that day. So a woman came walking in with the computer. I was up in front of the room, talking like I am now. If I remember right, there was actually a disc hanging out. I looked over, and as all of you know me, I'm never at a loss for words. You know, when it comes to the Apple II, I can go on forever. I was dumbfounded. I was dumbstruck. I just kind of said, whoa, what's that? I went running over and saw that. I went, could it be? Could it really be? Turned it over. And on the bottom, there was a sticker. Mark Twain, EVT, evaluation, well, maybe you know exactly what it stands for.
Evaluation.
Yeah, it was, I think, evaluation unit. Serial number 9. Oh my God. That's what they told me about at User Group Connect convention 5 years ago. Well, it was kind of interesting. I think that meeting was total chaos. Nothing really happened because, well, the guy in charge was a little preoccupied. I said, I'll want it. How much do you want for it? It's not for sale. And she actually had 2 complete computers and a spare motherboard. They're not for sale. Well, the meeting kind of was over. I got distracted. Ray McAnally, who, not to put Ray down, because he and I are really good friends, but Ray is kind of a New Jersey hustler. and he's a fast talker. Lo and behold, well, I'm saying, how much do you want for it? I'll give you anything. And she's saying it's not for sale. Ray kind of got to her. He agreed to take a look at the computer to fix it if possible. And he called me up and he said, look, I'm going to make a deal with her. There are 2 computers, there's 1 spare motherboard. Here's what I intend to do. I intend to chat you up to them to say, yeah, Joe Kohn, he deserves this computer. He wants it, but I also want one. And what he ended up doing is the problem with the computer, it was kind of interesting. The 3 different prototypes, they're all prototypes, 2 in cases, complete with the hard drive and the disk, and 1 just the motherboard. The motherboard in the computer that she had brought in had a very strange problem. And what happened is that when you turned it on, and we're using GSOS software, there were stripes, vertical bars running down the computer. And it seemed like it was the video chip that might have been fried. That video chip, unfortunately, is soldered in, so you can't just, take it out and replace it. So what Ray ended up doing, and in a way I'm very disappointed with how he did it. He didn't mark which motherboard came out of which machine, but he just started kind of taking parts and said, this motherboard is shot. I can't do anything with it. So he started swapping parts. He put them back into the cases, but we do not know. So this box says prototype number 9. It might be 9. It might be 5. 5 was the other one. And what's interesting is when I take it apart, you're going to see wire wrap. You're going to see that this computer is not complete. It couldn't be sold to someone in a store because it's it's an engineering evaluation unit. It's in a sense a work in progress. The motherboard in the machine that she was using on a day-to-day basis didn't have wire wrap. It was different. No, I can't say very different. It was a little different. The basic chips were the same in there, but what had happened, I guess the way that these things work is they build a prototype and they start testing it and they say, oh, we blew it, we made a mistake. And sometimes the mistakes have to do with miswiring, traces of the motherboard, so that as you open this up, you see all this yellow wire that basically is there to correct the problems that were on the motherboard. Well, the machine that had been in day-to-day use didn't have any of that. So we have to assume, therefore, it was a later model than this. Now, again, no one at Apple is talking, so I do not know, and I don't think anyone knows, when this project officially started. The box that this came in has a date on it and a name on it, and it says April 91. The markings inside say June 91. The meeting I had with the Apple people was July 91. So, I mean, it's obvious that this project was, really getting going and died in 91. But, how many previous prototypes there have been, who knows?
Something about the way Apple works is that EBT units, the motherboards get swapped all the time. And so the motherboard that you have in there may or may not have been the original one from there. Most likely the original motherboard that was in that case, you don't own. No one owns. Most likely it was trashed somewhere at Apple, the one that actually came with the case. They probably just kept those cases and kept swapping out motherboards, a newer motherboard, a newer motherboard.
Well, when we take it apart, we'll see there's a different EVT number written on the, I guess it's a little piece of tape inside. And so that's entirely conceivable. And now 2 of the machines have, in fact, the two that are in use right now are the same, or almost the same, in the fact that they have the wire ramp. And so, this machine is not, it never was finalized. So it's still, in being a prototype, it isn't 100% stable. We found out that because of the weight of the hard drive and 3.5-inch assembly that's also connected to the power supply, it was putting pressure on the motherboard, and on the underside of the motherboard, sometimes was making contact. And notice, I don't have the monitor on top here, because if I did, the machine probably wouldn't work because of the pressure. So this thing is definitely a work in progress. The fact that I ended up getting 2 of them from this meeting at GravenStein back in October is almost miraculous. Immediately after the meeting, I had to go shoot my big mouth off on Genie. I posted a message saying, "You're not going to believe what just happened." Well, that message got spread around a little. And this gentleman, Jim Pittman, who's involved with the Albuquerque, New Mexico Apple User Group, read it. He knows me. He and I have been in contact through email. He read about this Mark Twain. He was reminded of how a year before he'd been sitting his job, when he's not involved with the Apple II, is he works at the University of New Mexico computer lab. And a woman had come in there, and this is in Albuquerque, a woman had come in there, and it was kind of funny. He said he has all these Unix boxes and, Macs and PCs laying there, and he also has an Apple IIc, his own personal computer. And the woman looked at the IIc and said, "Oh, I used to work at Apple." And they started talking, and, "Oh, what's your name?" "Jane Lee." Well, Jane Lee had been, I can't remember, her exact title, but she had been in the number maybe 2 spot of the Apple II division. Well, Jim Pittman, they started talking. She said, "Yeah, I have a prototype 2GS that was never released." He didn't, he had never heard her name. He thought, impossible. So he didn't follow up on it. He read my message, and he went, "Whoa." He wrote to me, and he said, "By any chance, do you know the name Jane Lee?" I said, "Of course I do. She was, like the number 2 person in the Apple II division." He contacted her. Lo and behold, she lent her Mark Twain computer to the Albuquerque User Group, I think in January. And in comparing, maybe some of you saw, they actually took some pictures and posted them online. And if you look closely at the motherboard, you can see the wire rack. You can see the same as this. Jane Lee said that she believed that there were 20 of these in existence. None had ever been, in a sense, plowed under. And, there's, I guess, rumors back when Apple killed off the Apple III that they just took to a landfill and crushed them.
Elisa.
Was it Elisa?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I keep hearing stories. Oh, Apple, they took it to the land dump and, bulldozed them. Well, apparently these the 20 are around. It's my understanding that people who worked at Apple, names that when you look at who wrote System 6 or 6.01, that those folks have that. They're not talking. Maybe this guy who worked at Apple and was friends with them, maybe, I don't know if they ever said anything to you about this.
I know Dave Lyons has one. Matt Etheridge had one. I don't know what. Jim Murphy most likely has one. Mm-hmm. Tim Swihart might have one. Mm-hmm. Andy Nicholas might have one.
Yeah, those are all the same that I've kind of, I guess you would say, grapevine heard, but none of them are talking. None of them are saying anything. Really, when I wrote an email, they said, that doesn't exist. There's no such thing. I don't know if any of you have ever had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with Apple, but it sort of says, if you shoot your mouth off about this, we're going to take your firstborn. I mean, it's almost like that. And so people that work at Apple are not allowed to talk to the public about what they do. And so, it's kind of interesting when a number of years ago, I actually got together with an Apple II engineer who told me there have been 25 Apple IIs that have been built, that have been tested, that were never released. And the way Apple works, it's kind of a myth. Not a myth, that's not the word. Things at Apple, things at computer companies are different than in the real world, or the world that, most people are used to. And one of the common ways that things got done at Apple is that people, just as all of us are kind of addicted to the Apple II, some of us may be more obsessed than others. The people that work at Apple, all the people that put out System 6.01, in essence, they came up through the ranks. They were users, programmers, engineers, and, they put in their time as users. And eventually they got jobs at Apple, and with access to all this technology and testing devices, and a lot of times what happened, the kind of common way products were developed for the Apple II is one or two people would kind of do it in their spare time at night. And, it wasn't like that they were authorized to build things. But I think this started way back when, at the beginning, the whole hacker mentality, Steve Jobs and Wozniak in their garage, and, they didn't, as anyone that saw that Triumph of the Nerds the other night, that great PBS show, if you have a chance, see it. It's really good, that early history of the computer industry. Things were not done the way they are in, Ford or General Motors, where, it's everything's top down. So we're not sure if something like this was put together by one or two people working on their own at home. And
I can assure you that it wasn't, because they had 20 prototypes like that.
But it may have started like that.
They may have started working on it like that, but I'm sure very early on they really decided they were going to do that.
Well, it's obvious, and after this is over, I really do want to take this apart and show you things. You can see that this is a standard 2GS case. This hole in the front, if you look close, it's not real smooth. This was not done by a machine or an assembly line. This was cut by hand or some power thing. However, on the back, you can see that this definitely was in a professional machine shop, because there are different holes on the back, different little connections, and they're not rough. They've been, obviously Apple has a very expensive, expensive equipment that they use to build computers. And so some of this was, kind of hand done, and some was done in the shop. Now, keep in mind, this machine came out in, let's start it up for you. I'm going to start some. Whoop. Look at that. ROM version 3, 1987 to 89. Okay. So it starts up just like a standard ROM 3. What's on here? I ended up putting back. I wanted you to see exactly how this came. So even though I had a newer version of the system on here, I put back what this is a pre-release version of System 6. And, well, I'll show you in the about box. It's something like System 6.D.44, which when I see that, it says, boy, this must be the 44th revision of System 6. I mean, I wasn't a beta tester. I had never seen a pre-release version of System 64. And so this, I believe, an insider told me it was called RAND. That was the code name for System 6. And this was a pre-release version of it. And let's go to the about. Yeah, System 6.0D44 by Andy Nicholas, copyright 87 to 91. So this is, you know, I mean, obviously this is different. This is something that has not come out before. When I got the computer, there were, well, I guess 5.04 came on 2 disks. System 6 came on 6. This came with 3 disks that had the system. Everything was basically, you know, the same, except there are a few things that were never included. A screensaver. And, you know, I just have to assume that that was just, you know, something thrown together by one of the people working on it, and maybe they didn't have room on the disk. And so it came with Apple IIGS and HyperCard. Apple IIGS is the current version of it. If we go up and get a, you'll see it's the same as October 23, 1989. I had to reinstall my Apple IIGS the other day. As I keep telling people, when you have it do weird things, just copy it back from, you know, from your 3.5-inch disk to your hard drive. I did, and I noticed October 23rd, 1989. So this is the latest version. HyperCard, not so. I believe that the HyperCard originally came out in, boy, I'm mixing up my dates. It was announced at that final Apple Fest in Long Beach, which was, that was 89? Seriously? Ooh, boy, I thought it was 90. But, so this came with, I believe it's the original release of HyperCard. We can get a date. July 8th, 1991, July 23rd, 1991. That puts it right within a week or so of that meeting I had with Apple. So this was, at the time, the most current version. I believe that an update was released after this. Well, it says 1.1. Well, my dates are not, I just turned 49, they say. Memory is the first thing that goes. Second thing, I can't remember. But, you know, everything else is fairly standard. You know, a number of people have said, well, so what's different about this machine? And what's different about it is nothing from the user, from the point of view of using the machine. I mean, it comes with System 6 that some of us are still using. It comes with Apple IIGS, it comes with HyperCard, it comes with the, you know, the close view and the, you know, things that come with System 6. So to use the machine, I mean, any of you could sit down and use this exactly the same way you use your 2GS. What's different inside? And I'm not sure how we should do this, because I wanted to show you some things that, other things that aren't released, but let me take the cover off. Since it's small enough, I think everyone can see it. Whole length. What we have here is this assembly where we have a power supply. If you notice, this is a built-in fan. There's never been an Apple II that had a built-in fan. This is the first one. What we have here is this unit in the front here there's what at the time was a standard quantum LPS hard drive, 40 megabytes. What that means is if I can track down a 1 gig quantum LPS, I can swap that in here and have 1 gigabyte. And an Apple 3.5-inch disk drive. Very strange. The mechanism, everything for this indicates that it's a drive that will support 1.44 megabytes. There is what's called the swim chip, which is on the chip that is on the super drive controller card. It's built in. However, that super drive controller card, so that even though this should be a 1.44 meg drive, it isn't. It'll format to 800K. One of the things that we found is that the eject button, if you notice, there's a button here. It's kind of funny. There had been some phony doctored photograph floating around of this is what the ROM4 was. And there was no button, proving that the photo was, just phony. And actually, what I did is I took a photo of actually a scan of an Apple IIGS. I said, well, let me put a black thing about 3.5 inches long on there, and line it up. And I said, hey, it looks just like the ROM4. But this was, as on the inside, when you look at it here, you can, I don't know if you can see, maybe you'll have to come up after, but you can see it's kind of rough around the edges. It's rough around the edges, so you can see that this was, cut in. But aside from that, it's a standard case, except for this right here, which is the button. The button didn't work when we got this. As those of you who use Macintoshes, they've never had a button on the Macintosh. The only way you can get rid of a disk is drag it to the trash. Ray McAnally took a look at it and he said, that's silly. And in 2 minutes he wired up the button so that it worked. And that's what this, in a sense, this wire here is. Okay, if we look at it here, you can see the wire rack. And it kind of indicates, it's not finished. So what's the first thing you see that's real different? Well, the battery. It's the ROM3 replaceable battery, but it's in a different location. Here, where on all the other Apple IIGSs, you have the RAM expansion port. Here you have two 30-pin SIM sockets. And remember, that was what was standard on the Macintosh at that time. This assembly, when I went to visit Tony Diaz, who works at Alltech Electronics, and I'm sure you all know who Alltech is. They buy and sell Apple II equipment and Macintosh equipment. He took standard off-the-shelf parts and in essence showed me. He took a 40 meg Quantum, he took a 3.5-inch disk drive, and he had a case. And within 2 minutes, just reaching stuff off the shelf. He had what looked exactly like this assembly. And so we kind of speculated and thought, well, maybe this was a way, this machine was built to cut costs. because they were going to use parts that were standard on all Macintoshes. And I believe that those first Mac LCs came with 40 meg hard drives. And I'm sure if you took them apart, you'd see they were 40 meg Quantum LPS model, same as in this. And so perhaps the button wasn't working because Macintosh disk drives don't have buttons and eject buttons. So the Sims, when I purchased these, boy, they were cheap, 18 bucks a piece, $36. I had 2 megabytes additional. So there's 2 megabytes of RAM on the motherboard, and this, unlike the rest of our 2GSs, we can go up to 8. Actually, I guess theoretically we could go to 16, but there was never a 16 meg RAM card. 8 megs was the largest. Some people have them. Probably most of us have 4.
The upper rate can only be used as ROM.
Okay. So basically 8 megs is the maximum usable RAM.
Yeah.
Well, in this, 4 megs is the maximum. And, to tell you the truth, I have a 4 meg RAM card. I don't know that I've ever gotten an out-of-memory error, except from a program that doesn't release memory properly when you shut it down, like Hyper Studio 3.1. But aside from that, I'm convinced. I mean, I've worked with my computer all day, every day. 4 megs is plenty. I have a RAM card, 800K RAM disk set up all the time, so I only have 3.2 megs available, and that's plenty. So I think this machine has plenty. Now, what else is different? Well, all of us have 7 slots, right? Right. Every Apple II ever built, 7 slots. Super 2, 7 slots. 5.
Actually, they had 8 originally. Slot 0 was
Slot 0, yes. And on the 2 Plus, I guess slot 0. But that was a special slot only for a 16K RAM card, if I remember right.
Well, not only for that, but that's where it would go. That's where it always went.
Really? They had it in the beginning? Interesting.
Apple I, Apple II, and Apple II Plus.
Well, this only has 5. Well, what is everyone, you can, on an Apple II, you can put, interface cards wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. But certain conventions have developed over the years so that, traditionally, slot 7 is where you put your hard drive controller card. Well, when we take this apart, you'll see that there's a built-in high-speed SCSI card. So in essence, there's no need for it. Likewise, there's no need for slot 5, which is the slot traditionally for a 3.5-inch disk drive, because it had one. However, there is slot 6, so you can attach 5.25-inch disk drives. And so what else is different here? Well, obviously with a built-in SCSI, what is it? Small Computer Systems Interface. Everyone who has an external hard drive or a CD-ROM connected to an Apple II or 2GS has a SCSI interface. This one is built in. Now, one thing that didn't come with the system was a connector. So fortunately, Tony Diaz went over to Altec Shelf, and in 2 minutes I had a connector. And in essence, what this does, it allows me to plug this in here. Right there, I don't know if you can really see it, is the SCSI connector. You connect this here, you run it out the back. And that's what you all have on the back of your 2GSs if you have a external hard drive, a SCSI, SCSI device. So this can allow you to connect up to 6 more devices. You can have a daisy chain so that I can connect a CD-ROM drive to this. No, I have connected a CD-ROM drive to this. I could, if I wanted to, connect a, 1 gigabyte hard drive, a SCSI external, and plug that into the CD-ROM, or vice versa. And so in essence, this is kind of expandable. There's never been a SCSI port built into an Apple II, but again, standard on Macintosh. So, you know, it's interesting. Tony Diaz and I have talked a lot about this because we're the two that have them, and we've speculated. And what what he's been telling me, and I think there's truth to it. He said, in the manufacturing process, if you, let's say the Apple IIGS was still being produced on the same assembly line that it was being, created on in 1987. Well, costs of everything, computer-wise, have come down since then. So that if the Apple IIGS were still being produced on that assembly line from 1987, Apple's costs would be much higher than they'd have to be, because everything's come down. Back then in '87, boy, I paid a couple of $100 for my 1 megabyte of extra RAM, and now I can buy, 8 megabytes for less than I paid for 1 back then. So what Tony maintains is that part of this, the rationale for this machine, had it ever been released, was to, in essence, update Apple's assembly line. They could use the same assembly line for the Macintosh and the IIGS. And when you look at the amount of parts that are almost interchangeable, or not quite interchangeable, but you take a swim chip, it's used on that, it's used on this. They would have gotten their cost down, thereby allowing them to sell a IIGS for less than $1,000. And I guess, I paid, just for a basic machine, in early 87, it came to, I think, over $2,000, with the monitor, with the external, I remember the disk drive, 3.5 inch. I didn't have one for the first 6 months I had my GS. So it was $450, and I didn't have $450. So for the first 6 months, I basically used mine as a fast 2 plus, because that's what I had moved up from. And I couldn't even run system software, although I did have a friend copy system software onto 5 1/4s. And then I'd set up an 800K RAM disk, copy it, to the RAM disk, so I could actually run System 1.0, which, boy, it's interesting when you go back and use some old software. I think someone brought last month, weren't we messing around with a paint program that booted up to like System 1 or 1.1, and it didn't look anything like our GS, the Finder desktop. But, so other things that are different. There is built-in stereo circuitry. A lot of us here have gone out and spent $50 to $150. I actually paid $200 for my stereo card. And that was, Dave said that was 87, and it was something called a Future Sound, which to this day, people are saying, hey, that's the best sound card ever built. Well, this has sound stereo built in. It also has what we believe to be sound digitizing circuitry built in. However, we could not get anything to work with it. Tony Diaz, as a developer, has every CD, every bit of beta software that Apple ever sent out. And a long time ago, they did have some type of sound digitizing software that was never released. And he thought, well, if anything will work with this, it'll be Apple's own. No. So Apple, for the Macintosh that has built-in sound circuitry or sound digitizing capabilities, they actually sold 2 different types of microphones, and one won't work with the other. So that, on new Macs, I think they had this little round...
That's the older one.
Oh, okay.
Plain Talk is the new one.
Okay, well, I know nothing about Macs, so, if I get my Mac facts wrong, forgive me. But So, it's quite possible maybe they built another type of microphone that we didn't get. But the circuitry is definitely there. Stereo is there and works with it. From a user point of view, the only thing that I have tried to run that doesn't work is photonics, the FTA copy program. However, if you have a super drive connected to a super drive controller card, photonics won't work either. So I have not found any software that was, didn't work on the ROM 4. So, programmers can say, well, this is ROM 4 compatible if they want to. I think I've joked about that. I think that at one point on Usenet I said something about how Convert 3200 was ROM 4 compatible. Well, I think what I want to do for those who are interested, I would like to take this apart. And it's really there are 4 screws, but it takes a while. So I think what I'd like to do is do that towards the end. And I'd like to show you some other things that don't exist. As this machine doesn't officially exist. However, let me throw it open for questions, because I don't know if I've covered everything, or do any of you have questions?
Not a question specifically, but I would like to introduce Will Melvin, our host here, the Trinity Church, and we appreciate the chance to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Yeah. Club business. Will has agreed to let us meet here. And I think we're definite here through August. We'll see. But let's talk about that other times. Questions about the machine? Yes, sir.
How did the few that got out get out?
Well, we know how the one that showed up in Albuquerque got out. That was, lent by Jane Lee. The people who I got these from, does anyone remember them? The husband showed up at the November meeting to say, they said, the official story, they told me, is that this guy, the husband, he has one leg, lost a leg in Vietnam. And so that place is about 50 years old. He had served in Vietnam with a guy who ended up going on and becoming an engineer and working at Apple. They stayed, they were war buddies. They stayed friendly over the years. The story was his buddy, who was an engineer, married a woman who also worked at Apple. Apparently they had a very messy divorce. And he told me the story had something to do with the Apple II. When the Apple II, when it was killed off, apparently they had different allegiances. One was a Mac fanatic, one was an Apple II. They ended up getting divorced, fighting all the time. Going, Apple II is better than Mac. And they ended up getting divorced. And the story they told me is they had 5 of these machines. And the husband was very upset with the wife. It was the wife's. He called up Conrad, the gentleman with one leg, and said, I'm really upset with my wife. We're getting divorced. She has all these computers. Come and pick them up. So in essence, he kind of, so he did. Now, I don't know if that story has any truth. Coincidentally, Jane Lee, who showed up in Albuquerque, New Mexico, had just been recently divorced. Is there a connection? I don't know. Ray McAnally, who had met the husband, said, and remember, Ray used to be a policeman, and he's surprised if they were hopped, stolen. I don't know. I just don't know how they got out. I don't know if there are any others out there except for the one that showed up in Albuquerque and these 2.5 and the ones that Apple employees reputedly or reportedly have. I think they're pretty rare. And so I've been sacrificing myself for almost 10 years now, working at low pay, less than minimum wage to promote the Apple II. I think if anyone deserves one, I do. The man agrees with me. Other questions?
You left me a little confused. You said it has 2 megabytes of RAM. Are you saying it can't go above that?
No. It has 2 megs on the motherboard, but you have what, a ROM 1?
Yeah, I have a ROM 1.
Okay, that has 256K on the motherboard.
Yeah, I know.
The ROM 3 had 1 meg on the motherboard.
Right.
This has 2
On the mother.
on the motherboard with a RAM expansion for an additional 2. Yeah, it has these SIM connectors, so that this could go up to a maximum of 4 megs.
You couldn't put a card to get it close.
I don't believe so. I believe that the 30-pin SIMs are only 1 meg.
You can get 30-pin SIMs up to 4 megs.
Yeah, the circuitry on the motherboard that might not support more than 1 meg SIMs. It's questionable.
Well, you know what I'll do is, Tony Diaz working at Alltech, they sell SIMs in all different forms. Next time I talk to him, I'll ask him if he ever actually tried inserting more than the 2. I don't think he did, and really, I think 4 megs is quite sufficient. Oh, one thing I didn't mention. On all of our Apple II, we have this little round speaker that, if you went to Radio Shack, you'd see it's probably $1.98 par. And I don't know about the rest of you. I got external speakers right after I got my GS. They're really, you need them. If you listen to music or like sounds, they're mandatory. This GS has something that is the worst thing you could imagine. It's called a piezo electric speaker. It is dirt cheap. They probably cost 50 cents a piece. What's very interesting, you get, on this speaker, you basically get sounds from Prodos 8. You get a system beep, you get that. But the Insonic is not connected to this speaker. However, with the sound, the stereo built in, you get full, beautiful sound. Now, what's interesting, one motherboard came with the same speaker we have, and one motherboard didn't even have a speaker. So, as I said in my article for my newsletter, something about, I just got the sense that Apple wasn't really intending for people to use this speaker. And, maybe they would have shipped it with, inexpensive external speakers. Although in '91, external speakers were, these Bose were $200. On the other hand, I went with Tony Diaz of Alltech to a auction, I don't know, 8 months ago. And he bought, I don't know if I should say this, if any of you purchased speakers recently from Alltech, but he bought something like 3,000 pairs of speakers, external speakers, that sounded fine, 50 cents a piece. And they're selling them, basically dirt cheap, $8 or $10 a pair, which, you could go to, Whole Earth and buy the same things for $25. So I don't really know what Apple's intention was with the sound, but the fact that the jack, you just take your standard, jack that connects to externally powered speakers, plug it in, and you have stereo sound.
Was your microphone jack stereo as well, or was that just?
Well, we couldn't get anything to recognize it. And, if one of you Mac people have an old speaker that you're not, or a microphone you're not using, want to lend it to me, I'd be happy to test it out.
Maybe one of the newer microphones for plain talk.
Well, you need one circa 1991, I would believe.
I've got an LC microphone that's about that time frame, and I've also got the new plain talk on stereo. So.
What CPU is in that thing?
Well, it's the same as all the other Apple IIGSs, which is the 65C816-4, meaning that theoretically it runs at 4 megahertz, but it doesn't. It can run it up to 4 megahertz. It's the standard 2.8. So this is, for all purposes, it's the same as the GS that we all have. There have been rumors. The rumor mill really was going crazy a few years ago with this thing. It ran at 20 megahertz. It was like the killer GS. It had all these things, but it was all rumor. This is, as they told me in 1991, this was no better. And in fact, it was less of a machine than I currently have. And so, it basically what it was, part of it, I think part of it was, part of the design was dreamed up by engineers who said, let's see how much we can integrate into the motherboard. I mean, the fact that, there's a built-in SCSI card right on the motherboard. There's a built-in, stereo. See, all of these things on the GS that we have on interface cards. So that if we have, a SCSI device, it's on a card that is big. It goes into one of the slots. If you have stereo, the only way you can get stereo on a standard 2GS is by having a card, an interface card. It's big. Well, all of that is built into the motherboard. And it's really interesting, guys, at Tony's, we had this thing apart. He has one of everything. So we took a Apple high-speed SCSI card. One of us looked at one, this SCSI card, and it was basically we checked off chips. Okay, well, here's the, and reading the serial numbers. There it was. And so we knew that it was a high-speed SCSI card because all the chips were exactly the same as the one that was sold by Apple for over $100 at the time. Let's see, SCSI, I think 109 was the street price. Sound digitizing could be probably 70 to 200, depending on what you had. Unless you bought Hyper Studio. Well, the slotless card with Hyper Studio is basically what's built in here. This is not a future sound, top of the line, but it's kind of an inexpensive sound digitizing hardware. And so that's the machine. I mean, we know that Apple, killed off the two after this. I guess at the time, plans were probably already in effect. I mean, no one there is talking, but I can't imagine that you kill off a $1 billion part of your company without a few years of planning. Because even towards the end, the Apple II was making Apple money. It was $1 billion. Boy, to flush $1 billion business down the toilet. Well, as I've been saying for years, one day Apple Computer Incorporated is going to be a course at Harvard Business School. And the focus is going to be everything you could do wrong in business, how to really work all your customers, and still make billions. Well, they're not making billions now, but who knows, maybe next quarter they'll be back up there. And so, this machine really, in a sense, it represents the culmination of the Apple II. It's the most, in essence, powerful, most efficient in the fact that everything's built in. There never really been a machine like that. Well, I guess the 2C Plus had a lot built in, the 3.5-inch disk drive, and the Zen chip. But this was like the ultimate Apple IIGS. So, since it's off, it's going to be really interesting when you turn it on. For any of you who have old quantum hard drives, they take time to, what's called, come up to speed. So it's interesting that with this prototype, as soon as you turn it on, you get the sliding apple, check startup device. And that would have freaked out a lot of people. And so I imagine that, had this machine ever come to market, they would have built something in to delay the startup process by 20 seconds. Let's see if we get that. I mean, it's disconcerting.
Joe, does it have the set of dip switches for the schedule card?
Yes.
One of those is a delay switch.
Oh, really? It has four dips.
I'm not sure which one.
So you see, you get that. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were a computer, novice, and I saw that, oh my God, my computer's broken. It's not. I think it's 20 to 30 seconds that it takes for the hard drive to come up to speed. So you just wait 20 or 30 seconds.
Cables.
And now chances are it'll start right up, yeah. Questions? Well, the Apple IIGS world has been eagerly jumping forward to the mid-1990s. Let's talk about vaporware. Let's talk about software that you've all heard about but have never seen. Chances are, very popular game for other computers, PC computers, I guess Nintendos, everything. Wolfenstein 3D. This is a great shoot-'em-up game, three-dimensional. You go through in a sense, a Nazi stronghold, blasting Nazis. What could be more fun? Well, this game has been, actually it was shown at Kansas Fest, the Apple II Developer Conference a few years ago. And this was, let me just show it to you. It does exist. It's real. And it works. It's good. When it's supposedly going to be released this year, a lot of people have been looking forward to it for a real long time, and I just want to sounds like only one's connected. That's strange. They were both connected before.
Power.
Well, what it is before you ever check the connections. Loose connections cause problems. As Will and I found out yesterday, when this machine wouldn't even start up, and all it was a loose connection. So it's just, and to any of you who have ever played this on a PC, you see it's the same. This game, when it's released, I guess it'll probably cost about $39. It's a lot of fun. It comes with 100 levels. Work is continually being done on it. The guy who has been hired to do the sound, the music. Oh gee, look, we only have 27 things of ammo. Gee, I wonder if there's Easter eggs built into this that will give us unlimited energy. Let me type in Apple IIGS, see what happens. Let me type in the nickname of the programmer, Burger Bill. I got full ammo. So this is one thing that guy Eric Shepard is going to finish up. A friend of mine, Tony Gonzalez, has been, I can't say hired because I'm sure he's not getting anything more than credit. Has been creating the music. I've heard a couple of different versions, and it's quite nice. I'm not a big game player, so I don't remember all the commands, but you can switch weapons, you can change the size of the screen. I think it's hitting open apple and numbers. There are 5 different size screens. And had I done my homework? Well, remember, this is what is called a beta version. And so it's not, it's not for sale yet. But a lot of people have been waiting for it. And I wanted to let you know, it's real. It's coming out. And so...
Unlike the machine, it's running on.
Yeah, unlike the machine. Well, another thing I wanted to show you is kind of interesting. Now, to do this, I ended up bringing a 3.5-inch system down because you can't, as you all know, with a GS, you can't really make modifications to the currently run system. What I want to do is boot up this system disk so that I can kind of make some changes to the system on the hard drive. I want to show you, I don't know how to describe this, the next generation of the Apple IIGS operating system, 6.02. As you all know, 6.01 was the last version that Apple released. Maybe a year and a half ago, these French programmers, Brutal Deluxe, kind of went online and they said, hey people, Apple's not going to do anything for us. It's time for us to take our future into our own hands. We want to release an update to the operating system. Please send us any bugs that you know about. Have you ever done such and such and all of a sudden your system's crashed? If it has, please tell us so we'll be able to fix it. So what they ended up doing was collecting bug reports. They disassembled System 6.01, found some obvious problems, and I don't know how many. I don't know how many, quote-unquote bugs they fixed. I got to tell you, there's one problem with 6.02, Brutal Deluxe. It's from Bordeaux, France. It's all in French. So that, it was really weird. We had it yesterday. I was trying to rename a folder, and I was typing M, and it was commas because they have, the GS, you can switch the language that it's displayed in and the language that the keyboard is laid out in. And I never knew it until Oliver Zardini visited me a couple of months ago, and he said, look, one of the things we really need is we really need to get an American keyboard. I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, the keyboards we have in France are very different. I said, you're kidding, and I realized, well, their alphabet's a little different than ours. But apparently there are other things, certain symbols, I guess like the symbol, like the $ sign that's on our keyboard. Well, that doesn't mean much if you're in France. I guess, I don't know for a fact that there's some other symbol for a French franc. So everything, what I'd like to do is just take the System 6.01 that is here, copy it into a folder called Old, take Brutal Deluxe's system, and copy these 4 files out to the root directory, meaning that once that happens, then this becomes the operating system. Shut down the computer. Set the control panel back to slot 7. And restart it. Now this is, completely unauthorized. if Apple cared, they could sue me, they could sue Brutal Deluxe for copyright infringement, because I can assure you, Brutal Deluxe did not write this from scratch. They basically corrected problems.
Just a comment, our member Henry Sherwood, who lives near Bordeaux, bought his Performa in Paris, I think it was. So when Apple came out with the new Mac system, the upgrade to 7.5, I got a copy of it from Apple and sent it to him. Then he posted back to me or faxed me that he couldn't get it to run, and finally he figured out that his original system is French, so he couldn't run the upgrade or the update. So he has to get that from his dealer in Paris.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I thought all these computers were built the same, no matter where they're sold. But apparently there are differences, minor differences in computers that are sold in Europe, just because of things like different symbols.
Yeah.
I mean, a dollar sign symbol. But what's interesting is that's important for programmers.
Yeah.
And so Brutal Deluxe felt that in order for them to program, because all the compilers and the computer languages are all in English, they're all made in America. In order for them to do things a little more efficient, they need an American keyboard. So, I mean, you can see the trash can's named something different. All of the pull-down menus are in French. When you go here, everything here is in French. About this Apple II, this is in French. And so, unfortunately, I don't know how, like I said, I don't know how many bugs this thing fixed. But they had a little problem. There were two people in Brutal Deluxe, and one of them lost their hard drive, crashed. And so even though they had the actual their quote-unquote 6.02, which is, not really 6.01.1.001, they lost their source code. So I don't know if there ever will be, a bug fix on Genie, on the Apple II Programmers Forum. Mike Westerfield, who owns the ByteWorks and publishes many of the computer languages that are used in the GS, also asked a few months ago, let me know what kind of bugs that you found in System 6.01. And I think Mike, being an American, a businessman, different than Brutal Deluxe, who basically, they're in their early 20s. If Mike were to ever do something, I'm sure what he would do is come out with a program that you ran the program and it would patch your System 6.01. I mean, this, what Brutal Deluxe has done is simply disassembled Apple's copyrighted software, made changes to it. So that's not quite legal, but in this day and age, I posted on the internet that we were going to be here. Part of me was kind of thinking, Apple is going to send their police force to come and seize this computer. Well, we're kind of
Don't care that much.
And so now one thing, it's really interesting. Brutal Deluxe has created a lot of stuff that has never been released in the U.S. And they're basically programmer utilities that, I showed this to Will yesterday. They have a memory purger that when you're programming, and your system crashes, you get a little number on screen kind of telling you where, the memory location. And so they have a utility here that tells them what block of memory is being used by what piece of system software. And it'll purge memory. And they just have they have some things that where in memory is. And this shows you where everything, the memory that your GS is using, what's using it. which is something that, 99% of us could care less about. But they've created a lot of, programmer utilities. What's interesting is, what Brutal Deluxe has released, a lot of their games, they got from friends who programmed them for the Macintosh. And I said, Apple II, sure, you can have our source code, sure, you can have our original graphics, what do we care? And so they've released a lot of freeware, games. Well, as it turned out, the games were all created on a Macintosh originally. And not that Brutal Deluxe did their work on a Mac, but their friends had Macs, and Macs had a different screen resolution. So they created one of these programmer utilities that they just called Convert. And it was this, it kind of looked like this, meaning it was gibberish, to the average person it didn't mean anything. But basically what it was a programmer utility that they could use to convert graphics from one format to another. And at some point they said, well, how about we make it user-friendly and sell it? And in a short, to make it a real short story, 2 years later, Convert 3200 was released. And it definitely has a non-standard interface, but people can use it. It's not it doesn't look like gibberish like this. I have a version of Convert 3200 from those days. I can't use it. I don't know what it means. I don't know what any of this stuff is. So, it's kind of interesting. And I'm sure a lot of programmers have things that Bill Heinemann as, one of the things that he does is like port games from one system to another. This Wolfenstein's 3D, he actually took, and I don't remember what I guess it was a PC. It ran originally on the PC, and he created a version for the Super Nintendo by quote-unquote porting it. Well, he has software he's been threatening to make a little more user-friendly that will take any kind of like sound format and convert it to 2GS format. Any kind of graphic, and he kind of gets caught up, and so he has these programs that he said are user hostile. Like any of us that weren't programmers would look at it and say, what's this? And probably delete it. Yeah, so it's interesting. A lot of this stuff is, what Brutal Deluxe has done. As far as using the system, though, it's the same. And I want to show you something here. They have, Brutal Deluxe is working on 3 games, one of which I'm not allowed to tell you the name of it. There's a picture of it on the back cover of my newsletter. Maybe it was familiar to some of you, but I'm not allowed to use the L word until permission is received from the copyright holders of Lemmings. Lemmings GS is playable. It's interesting. They've been sending me, they said they would send me a version once a week. It's been more like once a month. And I've been getting these emails over the internet, these 20-part emails that I then have to, recreate. And they're putting this game together. It's kind of fascinating to see. The first month, there were just pictures, nothing happened. The second month, I could scroll the screen, but I couldn't really do anything. The third month, there was animation. And then finally, the other day, the first version showed up that actually was playable. They're busy trying to get permission from the owners of the copyright. So, I don't know what the status of it will be. It's like an updated version of this, where what it is, it's kind of an underground maze. And the name of the game is, it's in French, Bugs Bats, which is, I told Will, I think is a play on words. I think it's Bugs Bunny but I think it also means banish the bugs. So it's like a double entendre. Whatever they call it, you know, when it's released, I have no idea. But what it is I publish now Woods software. But I got to tell you, I don't, as the publisher, I don't call any of the shots. You know, they basically told me, here's how much Convert 3200 will cost. Here's how, you know, they basically approached me and said, you're the publisher, and here's how it's going to work. And I didn't have any say. Likewise, you know, they're telling me stuff about their upcoming programs. And for those of you who are on GNAME, you might have read about a little controversy we had. They created a CD-ROM that they informed me, you're the publisher of this. And I looked at it,
Okay, guys, look at your tickets. It's number 3814713.
713.
713. Oh, it's right here. Oh, okay, it's super conference. I don't know what those is.
Welcome to use the tripod.
I wish my big lens was working. Oh, it does. It needs to switch 3
Surprised you're doing all this.